In progress.
All right, I'd like to call the meeting to order and start with roll call.
Chair Eagleson-Cheslowich,
Present.
Vice Chair Roman,
Present.
Board Member Willis,
Present.
Board Member Wimmer.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Are there any agenda changes?
There are no changes for today's meeting.
And do we have any public comment on items not on the agenda?
I have no public comments for oral communications.
All right, let's move on to the schedule and staff report.
Okay, oops. One moment while I share my screen. Good morning. Amy French, Chief Planning Official. Sharing on the screen a few things, starting with just a brief recap. I'm sure those on the commission and others observing the meeting are aware that the City Council on April 22nd placed 16 properties, including 3 city properties, on the city's local inventory. And we did have 2 additional properties that were we did not hear from before the packet was produced. So those will be heading to council consent calendar in August. With any other property owners who are interested in putting their properties on the inventory, we still haven't heard back from many of the folks we sent certified letters from, but we're working on it. So on the screen today, we have our meeting with a couple of absences, but we do have 4 in the chamber, so we can continue. We have on May 13th, council is going to be deciding, they were given the opportunity to decide whether or not to reduce the board to 5 members from 7, and other modifications, including reducing the meetings to 1 meeting per month. The goal is to attract candidates and not have to spend so many staff resources with multiple recruitments, which has been happening. So there's some good news there. I've been speaking with a couple of interested candidates, so we'll see. I believe we've had an application. So then the next bit is that recruitment that's open closes on June 2nd. So it's possible, but I'm not sure it's likely that we would have the interviews of the candidates and placement before the June 13th meeting. So we'll see, but I still think it's appropriate to have on June 13th the bylaws discussion after council action, so we can modify those accordingly. And then finally, just a note that the CLG annual report deadline was pushed to June 7th. So I have not turned that in. Still, if you had other trainings you wanted to let me know about, it's still timely for me to put those on that report. And then, of course, that's the grant deadline as well, if we were to submit a grant. So that concludes staff's presentation about this, but those of you who have not met him yet, Stephen Switzer is our new planner who is full-time and dedicated to the historic preservation program. At long last, 6 years later, we're very happy to have this situation.
Welcome. We're so happy you're here.
So Amy, the information we got in our packet is the recommendation that's on the consent calendar actually for council to approve meeting frequency and composition of HRB members?
Correct. It's on the consent calendar, which means the council does not need to have a public hearing. People can speak to the consent calendar if they would like, but it would take 3 members of the city, 3 council members to pull it off consent and hold a discussion. They have very packed meetings, so this is the way to go forward and ensure we get it on the agenda as quick as possible.
And an action is to modify the ordinance in that way?
Yeah, so in your packet, we included the staff report with the ordinance, I believe, that shows the changes. So reducing from 7 members to 5, modifying the qualifications to be consistent with the CLG requirements, as well as noting the reduction to 1 meeting per month. This doesn't say it's silent on, that's the regular meetings per month, but it's, it's always at the pleasure of the chair to, such as these quarterly evening meetings, that's not in the municipal code. We just have been doing them. And that's something when we bring the bylaws, June 13th, we can discuss, possibly continuing that program into the next work plan year.
There were a couple of things I didn't, obviously, don't agree with in the proposal to council. But the one that really stuck with me is, and I don't know if this is part of what's on the consent calendar, is not having a member, not requiring that we have a member who has a property that's affected, a historic property, either in, one of our districts or a 1 or 2. And I think that's not going to look good. I think I think we need to show some accountability, and I think that having a board that nobody has a skin in the game is not really the look we're going for here. So is that part of what council is going to decide on? Am I got that right?
That was included in the ordinance that, yes, is on consent calendar. So the council could pull it off consent calendar and schedule it for a public hearing sometime in, I don't know, the future, to have further discussion about it. They can't pull it off consent and discuss it that night. That addition, I did not include that addition. It was added by others, so I can't really speak to. I think it's just all in service of trying to make sure that we get applicants for this board to reduce the obstacles for participation.
I got to say, I think it's all somewhat of an overreaction. But if we leave it on the consent if they leave it on the consent calendar, if it goes through, can we come back in 6 months and say, meeting frequency? Like I think it's a mistake to just have once a month. And I'm pretty set in my opinion on that one. And I think the composition of the board, it really is important, that we need to represent our community, that and our community being historic homeowners in this case. So, but if it stays on the calendar, it gets approved, can we come back in 6 months and modify that?
Well, anything in the municipal code is subject to potential modification. I think at this point, because we didn't agendize this for full discussion this morning, that anyways, I'll just give some comfort, and that is bylaws can say the things beyond what the code says that takes an active council to change. So certainly special meetings are always an option. Additional special meetings during any month of the year is always a possibility. And if there's a big project coming through, like we did with the inventory project, we had additional meetings, these evening meetings, and we could have had additional meetings on top of that if the board chose to. It's really at the pleasure of the chair, which is what the code says right now.
Okay.
Were there any other questions about item
no,
one?
I think I feel like we're getting into agenda item 2 territory. So we should just, I think we're ready to talk about that one.
Okay, yeah, let's move on to agenda item number 2. Can start with the staff report.
Yes. So today we are joined with our Director of Community Services, who is in the chambers, and she's welcome to come up to the staff table, being that she's city staff.
I'm sorry, I misspoke. I thought, since it was in the packet, I thought the ordinance changes were agenda item 2. So
No.
Oh,
Okay. I was wondering why you said that.
yeah, sorry. No. I agree with Caroline. Unfortunately, we didn't agendize it today, it looks like. But I agree. I had some concerns about number 4, removing the code requirement. So should we push this out for, like, is it possible to take it off of council's consent calendar so that we can make changes, or?
I mean, only council can decide if they want to pull it. If you want to lobby to have
Oh.
council remove it from their agenda, what it means is we might have lack of a quorum. It just depends on the grace of the remaining members that haven't left, who are no longer, in their term. It just concerns me. Council takes a break in July, and I mean,
In theory, like if we felt strongly about the homeowner of a category 1 or 2 requirement, we could bring that back as a separate individual item at a later date, correct?
yes, that we can agendize for June, and, maybe we could agendize for council consent in August to modify what they did in May, or, May 13th.
Okay.
Or possibly even, so it's May 13th. We could possibly bring it back in June because they're still, well, anyways. If the HRB, if the pleasure of the board is to lobby for modifying that piece to retain that piece about ownership of a category 1 or 2, that's something that the board could decide to do as a board, or as a less than a full quorum, but we probably should. We're not agendized to really speak to
We
it.
are out of scope at this point. Okay, yeah, all right. Let's move on to the Tower Well Park. So for clarification, just a discussion of this item 1 was to lay out what's going to council, not to have a discussion about it. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's just really updating the board about, I wanted to say, what are we usually just, what are the upcoming meetings? I'm showing cancellations, the second meeting of each month, as we discussed that earlier, what's coming before council, because it is coming. The options for council is to remove it from consent and agendize it for a later meeting, which could happen potentially in June. I don't know when there would be time to add a public hearing item before their break.
Yeah.
It's just my concern.
I think our recruitment issue perhaps is serious enough that we should proceed with this, but I would be supportive if there's enough board interest in the one fix-it item to go back and take care of that, if that's something that there's enough.
I just had a comment, and I don't know if this is taking it too far, but instead of changing the ordinance stating we can go from 7 members to 5, can't we just introduce an exception? Can't we just say, keep the wording the same, but have an exception that says in an event where recruitment doesn't result in 7 members, there is an exception that we can live with 5 members for a period of time until the full board is recruited. Like codes always have exceptions. And
Well,
instead of
zoning codes
changing
do.
the code-
This is a municipal code, Title II,
Right.
administrative, and it's not like it's a variance to the development standard. So I am, I don't know how to respond to that, but I think probably not. I think it needs to be one or the other, either 5 or 7. I mean, the council's been reduced from 9 to 7. That was an action that they can't just decide to increase it to 9 again just because they want to. That would have to be. Anyways, it's more complicated than I think I can respond to at the moment.
Okay, thank you. All right. Item 2.
So we have Kristen O'Kane from the Community Services Department. She was there at the council meeting in March when council approved the Tower Well Park name and directed the HRB and Park and Rec Commission to consider Frederick Irely, if I'm saying that right, Tower Well Park. They also suggested the city submit a nomination to the national and his California registers, since this had been deemed eligible during the last survey. And then since that time, of course, council has placed it on the inventory as a category 1. Just to have some images here showing some of the park features. there's, a bench, there's an interpretive sign. There's also a park sign. I don't think I captured on that image. This had been to the PAHA to recommend a park name as set forth in our code. And they were the ones that recommended Towerwell Park to be consistent with the historic significance. And then a speaker came to council to bring up this idea to retain or add the name Fred Irely because it had been called Fred Irely from prior actions with recommendations by the HRB. And so a little note on Irely's service to Palo Alto and his passing in 2000 before the park was named after him or the site. So this is the recommendation. I'm sorry, that's the Mills Act next item. So the recommendation is for the HRB to discuss the name. Kristen, did you want to add anything to what I've said?
Good morning. I'm used to these meetings at night, so I almost said good evening. Good morning. I'm Kristen O'Kane, Director of Community Services. I don't really have much to add. The staff is open to whatever name seems to be the most appropriate for this site. Following this discussion here, and this is an action, we would bring this back to the Parks and Rec Commission and then council to finalize the name, depending on what the action is tonight. And then we will follow up with a formal dedication of the site, ribbon cutting, as this is probably the first new park dedication in Palo Alto that has occurred for quite some time. So it is a significant event, even though it's a small little park in Palo Alto. We don't have the opportunity to add new dedicated parkland very often. So we would do some sort of ribbon cutting and ceremony to honor that. So thank you for your consideration today.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any public comment on this item?
Yes, I have one speaker card from Herb Borak.
Yeah, thank you. I've provided a copy of my recommendation to council for the March 4th meeting that appeared in your March agenda packet. And the council has asked in their action of the meeting in May that for your direction on the park name, and also there's a separate item here about, no, I'm sorry, this is just on Towerwell. Next is number 3. First of all, it was at the council that they introduced the first name Frederick. As anyone who looks at the Rogues Gallery of Mayor on the back wall, former Mayor Irely's first name was Fred, not Frederick. And that just apparently from the minutes, I haven't gone back and watched the tape of the meeting to find out if the minutes reflect what the actual motion was, but it's possible a council member said Frederick without knowing that that wasn't his name. The council there's a policy for naming and renaming city parkland lands, essentially something that a whole property the council does, and an item within a property staff can do. The public record of what happened in the past with Parks and Recs, with the rest of the public records, has been systematically removed from the online set of information. So it requires some effort to see just what kind of recommendation came to Parks and Recs originally, and whether it was for just the tower, whether it was for the site. And the council's action in dedicating the parkland, they actually dedicated it with the name Towerwell Park without anyone else's name on it, and not leaving the name open. So if the original one was, Fred Irely for the entire site, that's one consideration. Otherwise, what's coming in with nice council follows the rules and saying, oh, it's going through the procedure of changing a name. The important part was that the park was dedicated. And I've given reasons why I thought it was already named for Fred Irely and why it should be. But as a recent quotation of the day in the San Mateo County Daily Journal said, you have to know what the rules are before you break them. And the sense I get from the council these days is that it breaks the rules without knowing what they are. And that may be some indication of why there are so few people wanting to apply for boards and commissions. Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Board discussion?
Is it necessary to dedicate the site to a specific person? But what is the impetus of dedicating the site to a specific person?
Oh, do you want to?
No, it's not necessary. We do have a lot of parks in Palo Alto named after people, and we have some that aren't named after people, so it's not necessary that the change be made. The current name is Towerwell Park, and then council asked for subsequent conversation to change the name now to Frederick Irely Towerwell Park. Or Fred. The motion says Frederick, so I think that's open to discussion as well.
It's a little site. I like the idea of a little name. And Tower Wells seems long enough. So it would mostly be a matter of signage because I don't think the public is going to start calling it Fred Irely Tower Wells site. It just doesn't roll off my tongue. So what difference does it make one way or the other? Is it like signage or education or something or nothing?
So we will put a sign at the park to match all of our other park signage. It will be in the municipal code that this is a dedicated parkland. So the name would be there. And I mean, that's the difference. If it's up to, I guess, the governing bodies, if we want to name the park after Mr. Irely or not.
So is
It's-
the interpretive signage that is already there, does it say anything about Fred Irely currently?
There is one sign that talks about Mr. Irely.
Personally, I feel like that is probably enough. I think that's great. That reflects his contribution. I don't feel strongly that we need to name the whole park after him, personally.
Yeah, I think what I'm feeling is that we can defer to council if they want to do it, fine. But from our point of view, I actually feel like it's stronger if you just say Tower Well site, because I feel like that communicates the historic part of the site, which for us is the important part.
I mean, I tend to agree with that sentiment simply because it looks like just one community member came up with this naming idea. I think if the city wants to dedicate the park to a specific individual, they should open it up for, community suggestions beyond just one person who suggested it, to get a nice, sort of collection of people who feel like the park should be dedicated to a specific person. But I do feel like if we did dedicate it to this person, I mean, it might give a false sense of historicism, because one might think, oh, did that person design the tower, or did the person own this property? And it doesn't seem like this person has any specific relationship to the site itself and the tower or anything that has to do with that. He was just a person who was affiliated with the city for 10 years and did a commendable job. But I think there's a lot of people who might have done a similar commendable job. So in my opinion, I don't see that it's necessary, given the fact that just one person came up with this idea. Let's open it, if we want to dedicate it, let's open it up to the community to come up with and vote on a person or something.
I agree with Margaret. I'm totally open to naming it after someone. Having just one person bring forth a name that is a male name that I'm assuming was a cisgender white man, just looking at the name is, again, perpetuating the great men of history model. And that's something that I think Palo Alto is aware of or becoming aware of, that maybe we should be more inclusive with our landmarks and namings. So I'm not opposed to naming it after someone at all, but I think it warrants further options and discussion.
So, I mean, kind of given that it sounds like none of us are, particularly enthusiastic, do we have to advance any sort of motion, or can we just sort of let the council, or?
Yeah, I feel that minutes capture the sentiment, but, so you're weighing in as four, and there's also no mic yet, or is there? Okay, I just want to make sure that we have everyone's voice captured in the minutes. Kristen, do you feel that there needs to be some kind of motion to help with this process?
I could make a motion that we defer to council, and that seems pretty
Okay,
blank, right?
All right.
So I move that the Historic Resources Board defer to council as far as naming the Tower Well site, that we feel it's stronger, just commemorating the building, but we understand if there's somebody they feel they want to dedicate it to, that is fine with us.
If I might just add, because this was a referral to the HRB to advise council, I mean, it's a little circular. So, if the motion could be a little stronger about, don't name it that, or, in your opinion, it doesn't need that. I've been hearing that it's a longer name than needs to be. I've been hearing, you should open it up to other potential persons. So I guess maybe that could be captured in a motion.
Personally, I think the motion, well, okay, from my point of view, I think a little motion that they'll read and will stick in their head is more effective. And, if they are interested, there will be minutes given to them from our discussion, right? From my point of view, I'm hesitant to interject too much in there, because I think we as a group have, we're happy with the status quo, and it's hard for us to interject other possibilities, I guess.
Maybe, I could do a friendly amendment or just suggest, let's just have a motion that says the board does not support the renaming of the Tower Wall Park as presented to us herewith, and let them, if they are asking for additional suggestions, I don't know, maybe we could include that in our motion, but basically we're just saying we don't support renaming it as presented. Because if essentially does pass it back to them for further action. All they're doing is asking us if we support the renaming of the park, and we don't. So maybe that should be our simple motion. Our motion should be the HRB does not support the renaming of Tower Wall Park as presented in this agenda item.
If I could ask, that's the motion. Is there an interest in referring to PAHA's process at all, since they were the one that considered the name previously? Is there something there that?
You mean
Because that's
becoming
the
more
formal
familiar with their
process.
process?
Their process is to consider, to consider names. So that's what has happened, and they recommended Tower Well Park. So I don't know if there needs to be a reference.
Our motion could be that we concur with PAHA, we agree with PAHA's recommendation and forward that name to council, basically. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
I would second that one.
Okay.
It's a little sketch, but.
I made a motion, I guess.
I like
But
a friendly amendment.
I think we should
that should be-
rephrase,
Yeah,
but
friendly amendment to Wimmer's motion, perhaps.
no, I didn't like
Right?
Wimmer's motion. I
So
think we should
substitute
start
motion,
clean.
perhaps.
And it
is what-
wasn't seconded.
Okay.
So I think we start clean.
So-
I think we, especially in this case,
Nothing's been seconded.
we should just be simple. We're looking for simple here.
Go.
Okay. I make a motion that the Historic Resources Board concurs with the PAHA recommended naming Tower Well Park and forwards that naming to council, recommends that naming to council.
I will second.
But The fact that you're saying that you support it leads me to believe that we're saying that the name and the whole item, that we support the whole item as stated, which I think is what we are not supporting.
Oh, wait, the item is to, I mean, what, we're considering it, renaming it to Frederick,
And
not
we've
his name,
decided
but
that
whatever.
We're not supporting the renaming.
No, we're not. So the motion
So that needs
is,
to be clearly stated because.
I thought that was pretty clearly stated.
She didn't say anything.
She said to support the PAHA recommendation that it be named the Tower Well site.
Yeah.
That was the PAHA recommendation.
But I see that there's a specific name that's being suggested. So, and we don't agree with the name. So we need to make that clearer.
I think, I see
Alright.
this motion as just saying what name we prefer.
So do we want to stand or do we want to amend it?
Would you like to add and forward this preference to city council if you want to reflect it as a preference per se? Is preference a strong enough word?
I think it's strong enough under the circumstances because truth, if we had more background information and more consideration of other names that we might support a name change, but I think what we all feel right now is that the Tower Well site honors the historic nature of the site, and we find that to be good for us.
Perhaps we say we prefer this over the proposed Fred or Frederick Irely Tower Well Park name. About something like that.
I can make another motion and try to make it more clear.
Okay.
Okay. Historic Resources Board recommends the naming Tower Well Park, not Fred Irely Tower Well Park, and forwards this to council. Was that more clear? I don't even.
Well, I would say, can I?
Yeah.
Haha, like.
I like things that sound more positive.
Historic Resources Board concurs with the PAHA recommended Tower Well Park naming as opposed to the proposed Fred Irely Tower Well Park. I got both. Are we good?
Well, I'm thinking let's modify it a little bit and say, because it sounds like the way you phrased it, it does just Tower Well Park sounds like a description. So I think what we want to say is the naming of the park should be the Tower Well Park rather than having Irely's name, whose first name we don't know, Irely's name associated with it at this time.
It's already named Tower Well Park, isn't it?
Yes.
So let's just say that the HRB does not support renaming the park at this time.
Amy, does that do it?
So
Or
I'm
Christine,
piecing this
maybe.
together. The HRB recommends retaining the Tower Well Park name.
Yes.
Council gave it on March 4th. We don't have to say all that, but rather than adding Fred Irely to that name. And did you want to say anything about
Okay.
PAHA? Or
Yeah,
no?
you might just leave out the Fred part since we seem to have some discussion whether it's Fred or Frederick.
It was presented as Frederick, so we should just
I don't
respond as
like,
Frederick.
I don't like perpetrating.
Okay.
But we don't have any
inaccurate things.
documentation. I mean,
Well, that's why I'm saying if
Herb
we could
came in-
just name it after
which leads
Mr. Irely.
which leads to the fact that this is also confusing. So we probably, it's good that we're not supporting it.
Yeah.
This is very confusing.
motion, I
This
could-
person, none of us have
Mm.
heard of, like. this
I
is-
could see modifying to say HRB recommends retaining the name Tower Well Park rather than adding Mr. Irely's name to that.
Okay.
Just say Mr., then we avoid
Okay.
confusion.
And if we
Right.
could amend it to, I mean, I don't have phrasing here, so maybe somebody will help me, but I think it might be nice that from our point of view, that Tower Well is significant in and of itself, and we feel like that is a name we would like to strengthen, that it represents our utilities as a whole and, our
I'm getting
our
confused about
originality.
the motion now.
Yeah,
We have to have
I think-
motions and seconds to accept
Okay.
additional
Yeah.
stuff.
so does that, Ms. French, the one, the motion you read, does that require a second at this point?
Yeah, well, it's not second.
Okay, I'm going to second that motion that Ms. French. or-
Hold on, we
Well,
have some
that
more
you read off.
intrigue here.
What?
We have some intrigue and Ms.
Yeah,
O'Kane.
I'm sorry, I'm going to throw a wrench in all of this conversation. So I've just been informed that the PAHA board is supportive of adding Fred Irely, not Frederick Irely, to the name. It wasn't their original recommendation, but they would support it if that was the direction that the HRB would want to go.
Well, I still think we don't.
Okay, that's fine. I just
No,
wanted
which
to
is
make
fine.
sure you had all the information.
Okay, so I
Okay.
think we need to make a clear statement, probably, I guess, without PAHA recommendation. We just need to say, this is what the HRB recommends.
Amy, do you have that original motion? Well, not originally, but the
Okay.
last motion you
I'm
suggested.
going to read it again. HRB recommends retaining the name Tower Well Park rather than adding Mr. Irely's name to the park name. Is that good enough without reference to PAHA?
Okay,
Okay.
I will make that motion.
okay.
Okay, whose motion is that now?
Now it's gonna be mine.
Okay,
I'm gonna claim it.
all right. But that had already been seconded. So now we need a second to your motion, right? The original.
Okay,
I second.
all right, there we go. Okay, now we can vote.
Chair Eagleson Cheslowich,
Yes.
Vice Chair Roman,
Yes.
Board Member Willis,
Yes.
Board Member Wimmer,
Yes.
motion carries 4-0.
All right. Okay, a second. All right, we'll take like a 2-second coffee refill break. Yes, thank you. Thank you. Well, I think it's a coffee refill second. Yeah. Yeah, okay, there we go. Okay.
Sorry.
No.
All right, so let's move on to item number 3, the Tailored Mills Act program recommendation to City Council. Let's start with the staff report.
Okay, let me start the engine. Moving beyond the last item. So, as per the staff report, staff recommends the HRB resume the discussion of the Mills Act program, Tailored Mills Act program, which is for historic property preservation agreements as provided by the state of California's Mills Act Property Tax Abatement Program, and to discuss, how this incentive is brought to council. And I had a couple of approaches, including that there might be an opportunity to provide a primer on historic preservation where the incentives are discussed and presented. Another suggestion is to prepare a letter requesting that council put establishment of a Tailored Mills Act program on its work plan for their coming work plan year. They've already approved their work plan for the year that we're in. So anyways, so that would be something. And then also there are some additional tasks related to looking at resource use, staff resources, et cetera, timelines and some other components such as audits. Other cities that have Mills Act programs conduct audits. So that's a workload item to consider. So just a quick slide on capturing what the HRB has done over the years. The last planner that we had that was dedicated to historic preservation left us in March of 2018. And there was a subcommittee that had worked with that staff person to develop this Tailored Mills Act program, looking at many other cities' programs and considering Palo Alto's unique circumstances. And so this was discussed over many HRB meetings as far as, moving forward, how to move forward, et cetera. And the last meeting that was held in any depth on this, I believe, was April of 2022. And we were embarking upon the inventory project. And I think that was the last meeting that board member Bauer, former board member Bauer, was here to say, we've taken it as far as we can as a subcommittee, and now it's ready for the board to discuss. So, so just the Mills Act, for anyone that is not aware, this kind of describes, it's in the report, but what the Mills Act is, when it was established, 1972, how it's an important incentive, and that the council had understood that it was a compelling incentive for preservation, but they were concerned because, as noted in the report and here on the screen, we need to have a policy and implementing procedures. They're concerned about Palo Alto Unified School District's income because they get income from the percentage of property taxes, and trying to figure out how many properties could qualify and be in the program. So these were some of the things. And so the council had said that, the three key historic issues for properties would be the significance to the community, the development pressure on the site, and the need for rehabilitation. So that's kind of what the ad hoc and former staff had considered as they developed this program. Other conversations related to this concept of a pilot program where it would be limited to, a handful of properties where, the rules could be established, but then modified based on experience in the program. It would include training the owners and getting feedback, adjusting the program. And then these were the criteria that were considered in that draft tailored program, was that they would be a category 1, 2, 3, or 4 on our inventory, or individually listed on the National Register or California Register, or contributing to one of the 4 historic districts. So the ideas in that were that the local contract requirements would include this 10-year rehabilitation and maintenance plan, inspection of the property every 1 to 5 years by a historic preservation planner, and with input from development services staff. And then the owners would have to fund and display interpretive panel and allow for tours of the exterior of the home, not the interior. And then that, again, consistent with the council's now very old direction, was to have a major public benefit with extensive restoration and perpetual maintenance. So I identified some potential tasks related to this, where we might want to consider getting having this primer for the community to understand incentives in the Mills Act program, perhaps this letter to council, also perhaps getting a tax advisor, economic analyst to help staff to identify this tax offset concern, and then also meet with Palo Alto Unified School District on the tailored program and get input from them. So that concludes my presentation, and I'll turn it back to the board.
All right, thank you. Do we have public comment on this agenda item?
Yes, I have one from Herb Borak.
Thank you. There are several issues that get mixed together in determining the need for historic designation and whatever benefits there are. One is the whole idea many years ago came into place that people concerned about the changes coming in the community in terms of development, and one way to preserve what was here and to essentially going against that intensification of development was to designate certain properties as historic, and they wouldn't be redeveloped. Another one is people running for public office, naming themselves as the historic person. And even if they might have lost an issue on the ballot, they would get the votes of people if they're running for office for they're the historic person, and that was at least 2 council members in different times in Palo Alto. And another is that providing incentives in terms of development is beneficial to those who earn their money through land development. For example, downtown, you can have additional square foot entitlement for historic preservation. And originally, you didn't have to provide the expenses for parking. And when the council determined you can have the extra square footage, but you had to provide the parking, developer Bill Morello wrote an email complaining that that's where all the profit was. And the further thing is, what is really the historic item? And an example, as I recall in the staff report, was the Hewlett-Packard garage. If you look at the plaque, or you're familiar with Palo Alto's history, it is only the garage that's historic. It's not the house. The house is historic by labeling it such in Palo Alto's zoning code, and then saying, oh, you can build more here. And in the Mills Act, it is a tour of the inside of the house, such as the Squire House, not on the outside. So it seems to me you have to separate those things to see what's important, and to focus only on those that qualify for California or National Register, and only the portion of the property, as in this case with Hewlett-Packard, which is the example given, which is just the garage, it's not the house. And since the recommendation is that the council study this rather than act on adopting changes at this time, my concern is that the council and the board separate those different issues. You know, how important is it to preserve something? And if so, if that's what the community wants, should they be given incentives for it? Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Any further comments?
No, just the one.
Okay, let's open it up to board discussion.
Well, before we start, I'd just like to clarify the board, and perhaps you all know this, that the Hewlett-Packard house was where the Packards lived during the time when the garage was historic, and it is the original house. So the garage is more important, but the house is historic by its very nature.
It would be covered by the Professorville district anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, and it would be considered a feature of the garage. So a contributing feature. I agree. Whole site's historic.
Anyhow, Tailored Mills Act program. I know it's something that's been under discussion by the HRB for quite a long time. I guess to start things off, it is, I think, a little bit of an oddity that Palo Alto does not offer a Mills Act program of any kind at this point. Many surrounding communities do. Many communities with, comparable quality and quantity of historic structures within the state do. So it does seem strange that we don't have one. One of the features of this proposed plan that I am really supportive of is the idea of a study session with council, or a time to really talk about this with council, because I think that not everyone may be familiar with Mills Act contracts and how they work and what they do, and particularly how this draft tailored Mills Act program would, place some guardrails on, potentially like the worst fears associated with the implementation of this sort of program. And I think that, before further actions are taken, the idea that like council would kind of want to discuss this and hear more details about it, I think is really applicable.
I don't know if it's possible, but I would like to, first I want to apologize, because in 1997, when I said, let's postpone this, I did not mean for 26 years. Geez. So I'm interested in something happening, and I think it's complicated, and it's going to look different here than it does in other cities. We have 2 projects that are in planning. One's under construction. We have the DeLamas property on Cowper, and we have the Julia Morgan on Chaucer. I think both of those would be really appropriate trial properties for us. I know the Mills Act specifically says a 10-year contract. I would like our legal department to tell us that we could do some kind of trial where, and okay, maybe we do a conceptual trial instead of an actual trial, but I think that actually having a property or more than one property, 2 properties, that we look at and see what the real tax consequences are, because the numbers are not totally clear unless you work them out, and what kind of benefits we could negotiate with those owners. I think both of them are interested in historic preservation, so I think they would be amenable to working with us, perhaps even if it's only conceptual. And I'm wondering, I know that grants from the state, the local government, things are coming up really quickly in June, but I'm wondering if this is something where we could really use some grant money to, basically set up our Mills Act as a trial program where we could figure out, we're looking at it so conceptually. I think it's just really hard for me, and I'm assume that means for even harder for council to really see how it's going to play out and what the consequences are and how many buildings we could actually handle, and how do you schedule, who gets, is it just the people who get there first with the money that get the Mills Acts? I don't know. But I think it's very detailed, and, we like process in Palo Alto, so it's going to be more complicated here than other places. And I would like some kind of call from the legal department, whether we could put in a shorter term Mills Act where we could actually test the waters. Does that make sense, Amy?
I hear what you're asking. So I guess I'm a little confused about it, but I hear what you're asking.
So I actually have a question. Like, if we were to send the Tailored Mills Act program to council as something for them to consider, I feel like their first question is going to be, okay, so what is this going to cost? And so is that something that is studied, and like, do we provide resources for that? Or by the time it's with them, is that something council is responsible for in terms of doing that round of study?
The way it's structured, the owners would be responsible for that.
No, I think they're going to ask what the program is going to cost the city, like in terms of staff time and impact on the district and, all sorts of things.
So I can respond to that. With every staff report we send to the city council, we have a resource impact section. And so to be able to fill that section up, staff would have to do work to figure out, how much time, the resources, what's needed. I mean, just to consider having somebody that is a tax or economic expert to pull that person in, how much would that contract cost, this kind of thing. How much time is needed for outreach, working with the school or what have you. So all of these things have to be considered and put into a report if we send a report to council.
Okay, thank you. So that would be just a feature of the report if we decide to send it along. Great, thanks.
Well, I think I was on the subcommittee with David Bauer, and we came up with this document that's included in our packet. But we were just hoping to do what we were calling a pilot program, which would be just like 1 or 2 properties that the homeowners would know that we're just trying to learn from this process and garner any information and their feedback. And I know maybe in order to get approval to do such a program, we have to sort of forecast the cost impact and the time impact on staff. And that was one of the things that we did identify, is that we would need, it clearly states that the properties would have to be inspected or visited by, a historic, deemed historic professional every 2 years or 5 years, or there's a couple of suggestions in our pilot program, sort of Tailored Mills Act program outline. So, I think we can probably put some general information, attach some general information to what that might take in terms of hours. I don't know what hourly costs are for certain professionals, but also I know that we continue to say that we don't have a Mills Act program, but the Squire House is under a Mills Act program. So is there some data or information from that process that is active? Isn't it? It's active, but I mean, aren't we learning from that? Or can't we forecast some of the numbers or the time it takes the city, given that project it has been active for many years? I mean, aren't we learning from that or no?
Because we don't have a program, that is basically a state act, right? That's being used, and the owner is benefiting from that tax setup. But we don't have associated with that regular inspections, or in that case, that one did not specify some kind of restoration that I'm aware of. It's a very old contract. And what was done with that one in 2016, 17, 16, I think, was they removed the requirement to do interior tours. And that was based on the state had modified their, had acknowledged that that's too much for private homes to be expected to have homes of the interior. So the council agreed to that, to remove that provision of the Mills Act contract for the Squire House. And so they continue on. We don't have a lot of data because we're not doing regular inspections or anything. It's not set up like that.
So looking at the notes from January 27th, 2022, Bauer noted that the Mills Act is as far as long, or the pilot program for from the subcommittee was as far along as they were able to push it. So I guess the question then becomes, do we do a study session on the pilot program with council before enacting it? Or do we ask them to push through the pilot program so that then we can look at the results of that in a big study session as we try to push forward an actual Mills Act program?
I think regardless of whether it's a pilot program or just asking for the implementation of a program, it's using this tailored Mills Act template, like kind of the principles. So a study session showing the principles, I think, would be effective in either case. And then, we could, I think, present options to them as to whether, if this is something they're interested in proceeding with, whether they just want to implement it or whether they want to do a trial with a couple of properties, because ultimately they're the ones who are voting on whether or not we can go forward at all.
Right. And I think leading up to that is, again, with this letter request to ask council to put it on their work plan to include consideration of establishment, all of that, like that process is something that they already have their priorities for the year. And, like there could be a study session, but, when to begin the work of establishing, it's,
reading between the lines, does that mean that basically they've already got their goals for the year and we're going to be like, hi, would you like to add this goal? And they're going to be like, nope, we're all good.
So, I mean, especially if there's budgetary, they're going through the budget for the year that starts, the fiscal year that starts July 1st. So that's all packaged already. So for instance, if there's some kind of additional resources needed to actually establish, to make sure we have the resources for these audits or what have you. So I'm thinking 2025 is more realistic.
So given their workplace or their work plan and budget cycle, is there a month, like if we wanted to send this, is there a month like in the future where it's like we should have it on our work plan to just send this then?
Yeah, I'm happy to continue this conversation. We have another meeting within this work plan year that this is on our work plan for the year we're in. So, if you want to continue this item to June 13th, for instance, and work on some kind of letter, somebody could start a letter, think further on it, have more discussion, and then we look towards, calendars for a study session, let's say, if that's what you think a good method would be. Then we could, they take a break in July. We start looking towards fall for
Yeah.
opportunity to.
I mean,
have a session.
they're not going, without us sending them anything, they're not going to consider anything. Yeah, I don't think that this is just going to like come out of thin air. So we have to send them something at some point. So it sounds like the question of timing of when we send this is really we send this and ask for the study session. Like it's just a timing thing.
And, I'm not sure, I know that we, a couple years ago with our subcommittee, we did a lot of work. We had numerous evening meetings and we went through the material several times. And we did have a staff planner at that time who really assisted in sort of capturing our thoughts and putting it into a nice document that we have in front of us. When we're saying let's agendize it, let's try to move it forward, we've been trying to move it forward for 10 years. So I think at this time, well, I've been on the board for 10 years. So I feel like we've been talking about it for 10 years because that's a subject that we constantly talk about in here. But anyway, I feel like in light of, the efforts that we did last year on reaching out to the public and having a lot of the residents be in support of putting their house on the historic inventory, there was huge pushback because there's no incentive. Like so many people specifically said, there's no reason, there's not enough incentive for me to put my house on the inventory. And even it says here, the Mills Act is the single most important economic incentive program available in California for private property owners. This is it. This is what we need to get our community on board with historic preservation. So I just want to always lead with that. Like this is critical to the success of historic preservation in Palo Alto. We need an incentive. This is the best incentive that we can offer.
I mean, I don't see any harm in asking them to consider adding this to their work plan, whether it's this year or in the next fiscal year.
I think we should ask now.
Okay.
I mean, we shouldn't put it off to next year. I mean, they can always say, oh yeah, we'll put that on our agenda, but let's keep asking and eventually it will, instead of waiting a year and asking them to put it on their agenda. And then they're like, oh no, we've already got our agenda for this year. I mean, the sooner we ask and the more frequently we asked, maybe it will get to that point, but there's some kind of pushback that I don't really quite understand. So I don't know.
With my suggestion that we might, I know we have, more time this morning, but with my suggestion that we might want to consider continuing this discussion and have some do outs for perhaps, we have one subcommittee member left from the original subcommittee, but if there's an interest in, preparing a draft letter to share with the board or some kind of, using that June 13th meeting, we're going to be talking about bylaws. Perhaps there's interest to have this agenda item appear again with some movement forward on this request.
Is there interest in creating a draft letter?
I have interest in additional information before we discuss it again. I'd like to see the Square House contract. We can find it.
I can send it to the HRB. We have it in our files,
Okay.
just by email and yeah.
I'd like for somebody to reach out to Los Altos or another, maybe a community Pasadena. Somebody's had a Square Mills Act longer that could give us some actual numbers on what the tax consequences are. Because I looked at those formulas and I was like, what is this stuff? I don't know, I guess unless you're an accountant, it's going to be really hard to interpret from the written description what that actually means in terms of tax consequences. So I know other people, lots of other people have Mills Acts. Somebody I assume would be willing to share with us what the actual tax consequences are. And the third thing I'd like to know is it possible to do a shorter Mills Act? Does it have to be a 10-year? If we want a trial or a pilot program, do we need to commit to 10 years? It sounded the way it was written to me, but I'm not an attorney, so I'd like to squish around it if we could.
I think it would be worth consulting the Mills Act itself. In the report, we did talk about what the state.
Yeah, it was pretty
contract
much 10 years, 10 years, 10 years, but
Well, that's what the state sets forth for Mills Act, is that it's a minimum period of 10 years. That's my
Yeah.
understanding.
I think it might be worth a call to the State Office of Historic Preservation to find out if there is some ability to do a pilot program. But I mean, I think part of it is if we could fund a pilot or two as a city and not ask the owner to do it. I think the 10-year commitment is for the owners. I mean, it's a fair amount of work and commitment for the owners to do a 10-year Mills Act. So I understand why the state would say those were the circumstances. But I think in our case and our, our personality as a city, it would serve us. I mean, we might be able to get on the ball, off this rail that we're on if we could do a shorter program and see what it actually meant. But I think for Palo Alto to commit to this 10-year thing when it's very hard to imagine what it really means, or to ask somebody to invest in, a Mills application where we don't even have a Mills Act, that's asking a lot. So I think we need to look at ways in which we can get the ball moving. And I think that we might need some alternatives to what was traditional 20 or 30 years ago. I mean, look at, Margaret was talking about 10 years ago, property prices and consequently real estate taxes in Palo Alto were vastly different 10 years ago.
I mean, I think this eventually starts though with council taking a look at it.
I support you, but I think we need to make it understandable for them. And if it's so hard for me to understand, I don't think council is going to have a better chance.
It just seems like we need, I mean, us as a board, I think we brought it to, we've added a content, we've got a document that we've worked on. I know the board is different now, so the document that we can all review it and, maybe amend it or make changes to it. But it seems like the city, I mean, even in its current form, I would just say, let's present it to them in a way that, this is what we've done. We feel like this is a program that needs to be in Palo Alto, and have them help us facilitate it. I feel like we're trying to perfect it just to present it to them. We can present it to them. Like, look how far we've brought it as a voluntary board. There's limits to what we can do. Like you said, let's call other cities and see what they're doing. Well, I don't know if we have the wherewithal to collect that information. It takes time, it takes expertise. That's why, we have staff, like we have a new planner.
I'm pretty sure Stephen wants to do that.
But also
think how much he'd learn.
Totally agreed that council can do what they want with this document. We present it as a suggestion and they can modify it, in any way they see fit in response to, staff recommendations, in response to cost data that's unveiled as part of the process. That what we send them is not set in stone. This is a starting point and a set of really solid suggestions, but they can change it as they see fit.
I agree. I agree with Caroline's suggestions for further investigation. I don't think, to Margaret's point, that we need to have every question answered when we put this document to council. If we're like, this is really good, this is ready to go for right now, it's as far as it's going to be, and council can ask those questions and we can figure out the answers. And at the same time, as we're waiting for council to review this, we can do the investigations into Pasadena and into the additional financial impact information and resources information. I think that it can be two simultaneous work paths that are happening.
Okay, so house sells for $8 million. Category 1 on the National Register, needs a lot of work. Electrical hasn't been updated in 40 years, kind of scary. What are the tax consequences? $8 million.
That home is not eligible under this draft plan
Why?
because it costs over $5 million.
So that was easy.
Also, I apologize for not having a good enough memory of when we completed this document. I don't know what happened thereafter. I thought we did try to take it to city council, or did we just do it and say, hey, look, we did this, and then we just filed it in our file cabinet? I don't know what happened to the effort to move it forward. I know that we lost a staff member at that time.
Exactly.
I just don't remember.
It did not move forward. Emily, the staff historic planner,
Yes.
left.
Right.
At that point in time, there was no bandwidth for staff to,
I see.
continue the efforts, like
see. Okay, so
reaching out to Palo
that's-
Alto School District, like
That's key to
looking
our
at-
success.
yeah.
So Margaret,
um,
you helped write this. So on page 32, I understand, I read this property value limitations differently, that I thought you could have a more expensive property, but the limitations for the contract would be limited to 5 million or less. But that's not what that means. The very bottom paragraph on packet page 32. Do you want me to read it? I mean, I'm not great with this stuff. So property value limitations. A limit will be set on total property value that will be eligible for Mills Act contract. But that doesn't say purchase price or actual value. That says value that would be eligible for Mills Act contract. Pre-contract assessed valuation limits will be 5 million. Pre-contract assessed valuation limits.
I actually read that the same way, that you could have an $8 million house, excuse me, but only $5 million, up to $5 million of it would be eligible for property tax rebates under the.
We need a
Mills Act.
lawyer.
Yeah, I took
Yeah.
that as an overall capital property value.
Okay, I believe that anything, I know it's hard to see, but anything in the lighter print that was in red. The original document, this is just black and white printing, but everything in red those were the tailored items that we were putting in as, this is how it applies to Palo Alto. So these were things that were subject to review. Like now that this document is now 5 years old, this all needs to be sort of revisited, and these tapered items
So
are
Margaret-
ones that need maybe to be.
But I mean, ultimately, like
Reviewed.
council could make a call on, what property value or what, percentage of assessed value, if we're looking at it that way, is, sort of an appropriate limit for a Mills Act contract. I mean, and that, I imagine that is something that if this were to go to council, they would absolutely take a look at and want to modify as needed.
I would just like to go to council with the strongest packet that we can, because we've been looking at this a very long time. And I would like to get off the board with the Mills Act in place. I think that the clearer and that we can make things, the better off we're going to be. I know council can do a lot, but I'm assuming we're motivated than they are on this particular one. So I think we should go in with the strongest statement and the clearest account of consequences and advantages that we possibly can, because I think otherwise it's going to be a year down the road and a year down the road and a year down the road, and I'm not interested in that. I want to be done. So I think it behooves us to do as much as we can before we take it to council. If the work plan for this year is already done, I think anytime we see any council member, we should mention Mills Act. Socially, we should learn all the ways to introduce that into our conversations with council members, wherever we happen to meet there, in the grocery store or whatever. But I think that we should focus really strongly on a future deadline, where it could be on next year's work plan for them, and give them as much. I don't think it has to be a lot of detail. I think it has to be the right details. So I think we need to give them, and also ourselves, something that's very comprehensible. And I think this kind of abstract way of looking at numbers and tax consequences, I mean, is there a way that we could take more money from the real estate taxes out of the city's portion and less out of the school district's portion?
I honestly don't think that we should talk about the dollar amount. I don't think it's about that. I think it's about presenting incentives. And I think that's why we do the pilot program, to better understand if this amounts to any kind of loss to the city. We've already done projections that said, it would be a minuscule amount of money that would be lost by the school board. I mean, the school board seems to have ample amounts of money and donations that we didn't feel like the Mills Act was going to make the schools go broke. And plus, we were only talking about doing 1 or 2 properties just to start, just to learn. And after doing the 1 or 2 properties, if we think, wow, this is a real threat to our school system, well, maybe we make a change. But we didn't feel, I mean, we did discuss all the financial implications that we could forecast in our own minds. But I don't think it's really worth even discussing the money. It's not about the dollar amount. It's about getting an incentive program into the city that people are motivated by.
I've been here a long time, and I got to tell you, the conversation when we eliminated the Mills Act, it was all about money.
But let's not lead with the money. Let's not lead with how much this is going to cost the city. Let's lead with, this is an incentive. And the city of Palo Alto needs to have these incentives in place, because as we've already experienced at the end of last year, how the community will not support historic programs without incentives. That's the loss. That's the financial loss that we are experiencing right now.
I agree. I think these are all the details that go in the letter, the cover letter on the program that we send to council. We lead with coming off of the program or the process we just completed. We heard loud and clear that the community wants to see incentives to historic preservation. And in reaction to that, the strongest tool we have in our toolbox is the Mills Act program. And so this is in direct response to the community needs. And then later in the letter, we can, talk about if needed, we can talk about how we can say something that says, yes, we know this was an issue with the school board in the past. We've done the calculations. This is a tailored program. So it's minuscule amount from it now, and address that further down.
I think this starts with the request.
Yeah.
And if council feels like this is a threat to an economic system that's already in place, well, let them ask those questions.
Yeah.
And at that time, we can say, well, yeah, this is going to take we feel like a very small incremental amount from, the city benefits, the school district in particular, but we feel like that the gain is much greater than whatever small loss that we might experience. And let them investigate what that means for them. I mean, we've identified it as a possible, this might be an issue, but let's not say that it's an issue, because I feel like we're shooting ourselves in the foot by showing, oh, these are the faults of this program.
I don't feel that way at all.
I mean,
I just am looking for clarity.
We just focus on the incentives. Of course, the loss of the property taxes that these historic homeowners are paying, it's minuscule. I feel like it's minuscule. I just don't feel like that is, the biggest topic of discussion that we should be focused on. I just feel like, let's not make it seem like, oh, this is a loss for our city, but we have to do it. It's a gain. It's a net gain. Let's focus on that.
Well, I think part of what I'm reacting to is on packet page 40 at the very top. And it talks about how the tax savings are calculated. Well, I always kind of assumed it was 100%. Duh, sorry. But this says between 40 and 60% each year for newly improved or purchased older properties. But then it's like, based on rental income, and I don't know how that really, I did read how it translates to non-rental properties, but I don't remember that part anymore. But for me, I want like lay language for this. I want council to be able to look over this Mills Act and understand what it actually might mean. And I just think we have a better chance of moving forward and seeing the missing pieces. And the more clarity we have, the better chance we have of getting a Mills Act in my lifetime.
I mean, that financial analysis would be included in the staff report, correct? I mean, if it were to go to council, but we can't modify state tax code.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely pointing to, which we know, we're not qualified tax people, right? So this is a lack of full understanding on the part of staff and the board, and so that's why it's identified. To be able to, get a study, we have to find out how much that would cost, get approval for the spending the money to get. So it's always connected to resources and what else is on our plate and how we can work it in. So
I think this is also this part that Caroline, board member Caroline, thank you, Willis is pointing out is also specific to each individual Mills contract. And that's why there's that 20% variance, because each Mills Act contract that the city enters into, they will be able to review, as it says in the packet, the specifics of that individual contract. So the variance is because each house is taken as a separate case, which I'm fine with. And I think what it's coming back to is, the question is, does Palo Alto value historic preservation? And what we saw from the homeowners is pretty much, no, show us the money. And we're like, great, so here's the money. Do you value historic preservation now? And they may say no. And that is the answer. And that would be really unfortunate from the stance of this board. But you know what? At least we'll have an answer. And that will speak volumes for what the city values and doesn't value. And that is the city council's, task to answer for.
I don't ever see the Mills Act affecting a majority of our historic property owners. I think it's always going to be a minimal part of our preservation program. And I love the idea of doing this. Can't remember how Amy phrased it, but the educational component of what is available for different types of properties and Darlene Yapley has been really good about, pushing me to identify all these things, because, the way our ordinances are laid out, it's very hard to, as a property owner, to look what applies to you. You have to really go swimming through a lot of different documents. So I see the Mills Act as being an opportunity to save properties that are, that we really, really value. They're never going to be the answer to, the only answer to historic preservation in Palo Alto. And I do support Mills Act, and I think we do have properties and houses, houses are getting older, and there's still houses that need significant updating that would really benefit from this. But I don't see it ever even being, 20% of our historic homes. So I think we need a Mills Act. But I also think that it behooves us not to create any ill will when we do put this out to the community. And I think we've seen how easy it is to sort of misinterpret how people are going to respond to things. And education is going to be our only savior. It's our only hope. Obi-Wan Kenobi. So I think we need to do this. When we do bring it to council, we need to be clear about what we're asking them. I think we can, I do think we can ask for money, to support some of these tasks, but, we've already talked about how many cities and California have mills acts, and this information has to be out there. We have to, we don't need like 20 properties. If we had 5 properties and we could tell them, what it sold for, what the valuation was, what the tax consequences were. I know that we're a basic aid district and our education, our school board, our school district fees are different, but I think we could give them a basis for analyzing what this would really mean to the city. And I think we could identify a few properties, a handful of properties that we feel might really benefit from this. And I think we've been kind of, wavering about pushing this into council. We need something strong enough to go to council that tells them we are very invested in this and we've done our homework and it's time to move forward. And I think just if we don't do it strongly and with enough information, it's not going to serve us. We need to, people are just going to latch onto it and say, they're going to pick the worst case scenario, they're going to do like, half the town or I don't know what, but if you don't make it clear what's happening, people in Palo Alto especially, I think, I don't know, I don't really know a lot of other communities, but I know that we are particularly prone to picking the worst case scenario and flying it up the flagpole. So I think we need to be cautious. I think we need to be strong. I think we need more information we can gather, the better.
Are you saying that we're not really ready to present this information to the council until we answer all those unanswered questions? I feel like
I don't know how we would get the resources to answer those questions.
I agree. I feel like we should present it as is. This is where we left off a couple years ago. This is an important thing that we want to move forward. Yes, there will be those questions, but I think this process and moving it forward, getting it in front of the council, let them ask the questions. And maybe they have the resources to answer those questions to themselves. It's not our responsibility to be experts at all of this and explain everything to them. I think that's why it doesn't move forward, because I feel like maybe we're trying to spend more time, perfecting it. I just feel like we've done a tremendous amount of work to date. I think it's ready for them to take a look at it and let the discussion begin.
I mean, could our request for, consideration or inclusion of this on the council's work plan include, mention of a joint study session, and then also a mention of collaborating on, getting the data, answering these questions? That, the part of this process would be a concerted effort, ideally with some funding associated with it, to, get tax impact numbers, to, potentially work with a consultant to see what the experience of other communities has been. But like as part of our request to bake in a suggestion that we figure out, that information they'd want to know.
Could we possibly do a study session with council focusing on the Mills Act and preservation education as a first step?
And this was something that I put forth as something that if HRB wants to consider doing that, we'd have to, get permission and all of that to be allowed to have a study session and all of that, because that is coordinating with agenda planning. But if you put that forward, I would pursue it.
Yeah. And I mean, I would want to see their initial responses to this tailored program, because, if we show them this tailored program as part of a study session, and like, they are just obviously not in favor of that. Like that's a significant amount of information. I mean, so I think it would be a mistake to not include some mention of this draft plan, because we'll learn a lot.
We send the work plan every year, and I think this year it's not going to go until August, probably after their break. All of the work plans is what I'm hearing. So with that work plan, every year they see the work plans. If they read through those, they see Mills Act keeps appearing on the HRB's work plan.
I don't know how others feel about this, but I like Ms. French's suggestion that we continue this to next meeting. And I think it would be great to have a draft of the letter to council that incorporates some of these points, and we can discuss it and talk about making that, initial request for them to incorporate this into their plan. And they would obviously have some discretion about whether they want to do that this year or, in a subsequent year, but it would at least get a conversation going and outline some of what we're hoping to see from this process.
Also, don't we have a council liaison? Jonathan?
No, the council liaison is Councilmember Koo.
Oh, right.
So she's our council liaison.
So, and she's great. She's frequented our meetings quite a lot lately. I mean, why don't we initially just speak with her? She's part of the council.
So I did speak with
Oh,
her,
you did?
and
Okay.
she's very supportive of the study session idea.
Okay, so maybe
she's
she
on
can be our
Zoom.
ally in making that
Wait,
happen.
Would Councilmember Koo like to speak if she's on Zoom?
Yeah.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning. It's a lively discussion, definitely, and I do think that I'm actually very supportive of a joint study session, and I think that on the Mills Act, that perhaps that it needs to be further vetted, and maybe with this particular subject just being the only one, then council can concentrate on it a little bit more and can ask questions and also help with the development. But I'm not speaking for my colleagues. I do want to say that I am supportive of a study session. I think it's long overdue.
So when we say we need to further vet it, can we put that in an outline, or those like specific bullet points that we need to work on to perfect the documents that we've already prepared? Or
well, as much points as possible for consideration. I think some of the public comments that had come in from some of the residents who are willing to proceed with putting their house on the register as on a Mills Act, but they need incentives. So maybe take some of those into consideration and put it on the list for council to consider.
I don't understand that.
Okay,
I would recommend, and I don't know how much more time we have to spend on this subject, but I mean, maybe we just need to have a study session, one meeting where we would really do a deeper dive and identify some of the things that we feel we need to include in this preliminary document that like the vetting that we just discussed. I don't know what those items, I always need something specifically spelled out to better understand what it is that the missing information that we need to amend our document with. So maybe let's list what additional information we need to get our documents to a point that we can present it to the council in a way that they would understand. Of course, there's always going to be questions on their part. And I think that just showing where we've gotten it to this point, yes, we need their support and more information, but we've got it to a point where we're ready, to try to implement such a program. And I just don't know what the additional information that we need to work on to supplement the documents that we've already prepared. I think that's the question for me. So what else do we need to do?
So I had prepared this slide and showed it at the end of the presentation of, potential tasks. So, included among those are this, primer on historic preservation, could take the form of one of our evening outreach meetings where we invite council, or could take the form of a study session with council at one of their meetings. This letter of request we're talking about, the bullets or outline of which could be developed between now and the June 13th meeting, if there's some interest on a member or two, to kick that off, start with a draft letter. Then these three at the bottom that relate to, what else are we missing, and relating to the money side of things and the school district side of things. So if any of those resonate as potential tasks, and to kind of frame how and when those might be pursued, or other ones that you are thinking of.
I think all of this makes sense. Everything on this slide makes sense. So, I am very interested in seeing the letter of request. And I don't know if particularly some of these, like the last 3 bullet point items could perhaps be incorporated into that letter of request, detailing like, these are the things we'd like to know. You know, I don't know if a funding request is appropriate or if that's something that it could be funded as part of kind of ongoing city operations currently, but to let them know that these are areas that we would, where we are seeking more information as part of this request to begin a dialogue about establishing this type of program.
Okay, so there was there a motion to continue this to June 13th for specific reasons, or did we get there? I think
Would
not.
we be able to see a draft letter on the 13th?
I'm happy to put a document together that starts the letter. And if people could send me their ideas or things, additions or work that is ongoing or things that have been done, I can come with something that we have put together.
Do those communications need to go to Amy because of serial meeting
Yes.
laws? Okay.
And then to me, so they'd have to go
So
through you?
how I
or-
imagine this is Vice Chair Roman, if you would want to take a first draft
Okay.
and communicate with me on that, we
Okay.
could, you know, just have a conversation, the two of us, and then we could think about the next steps as far as how to engage the rest of the board. I mean, obviously, after we go beyond chair, vice chair, staff, it starts to be, okay, well, now, you know, we're getting towards half of our remaining board, you know, but.
Okay. I am happy to take a stab at it and start working through it with Amy, and then do we send it out to the board from there, I guess?
Be in the packet? Or-
Maybe not is what I.
Yeah, I mean, I think
Yeah.
let's take our first step,
Okay.
and then we'll think about it further, and there can be some communication about the process that this would include.
Okay.
And then, you know, I can hear back from members.
And if we feel strongly about anything, we can email Amy.
All right.
I am your liaison
Thank you.
on staff.
I want to talk about number 1, though. So, Amy, do you have a vision of this primer on historic preservation?
Well, yes, I think having our on-call historic preservation consultant, you know, who I believe has done such, you know, such educational sessions in the past. I mean, we've invited our consultant to come to prior, you know, retreats for the HRB, you know, just a whole session on incentives. We've done that in our evening meeting. Just with me and the community and the board. If it, you know, there could be some work that could be done on staff level to print out, you know, the clarity. We have our bulletin. We could do a package for, say, one of these evening meetings, and look towards a date for that, and invite the community and council and the HRB. Then there's this study session specifically that could happen on the Mills Act, perhaps. I mean, there could be a variety of ways to get to this.
Yeah, when you use the word primer,
Primer.
I had this
Yeah.
vision of a little 5x7 booklet that explained it all so nicely.
I think that's the word that our consultant used after the meeting with council, that it became clear that a primer is needed for folks. You know, again, the confusion about when we look at potentially eligible, we're looking at potentially eligible for the California register and not for our local inventory. For instance, that's one. It gets confusing for people because of all the labels. Since that meeting, we met with a number of realtors, and we, you know, who've been in the business for 20 years, and they confess that they were confused, you know, even after being a realtor for that long about historic preservation and the different names of things and such. So, yeah.
Do you think the consultant would have something they put together for different city, just format wise, that Darlene and I might be able to use to kind of start you know, formatting something we think might work for Palo Alto, because we would really like to have I think we'd like to have a section where, you know, you can just look at what applies to your property and have it all right there. I know it'd be a lot of duplication, but I think that the clearer we can be, the better. And I'm just wondering if the consultants would have some sort of baseline that we could start from, because I'm looking at all these different categories and then different, you know, in professional, non-in professional, and then there's a million different, you know, things that might apply. And I'm just wondering if there's some formatting that the consultants have used in other circumstances that I might be able to grab onto. Does that make sense?
Well, it seems like you're doing considering working on some handouts, and I think staff would be probably more, I mean, because we're in the weeds with parcel reports. And this is why we always encourage people to come talk to us directly, because each property is different and it's hard to make just a table that helps everybody. It's very specific to each property. So that's a conversation. I don't know the answer to your question, but certainly they wouldn't have done that for Palo Alto. Other than,
I didn't mean for Palo Alto. I'm just looking for how other cities have presented it, you know, so I can interpret it for Palo Alto. Because, you know, I have some vague idea. Well, I have a pretty good idea that, you know, I'd like to, you know, come and not have to call you up thinking about buying a property. I just want to like pull this one thing off the internet that applies to that particular property that I'm thinking about buying.
so I'll just say, one of the things that the council directed staff to do as part of this April 22nd action was to look at what we can do about our parcel reports that say potentially eligible. So the conversations we started with some realtors, you know, I mean, I can go deeply into this or not, depending on our time constraints today, but you know, certainly every property that's 50 years or older in Palo Alto is potentially eligible for listing on the California Register, every property. So we're talking about 1974 and younger. And so, you know, one approach, which would probably ruffle feathers, would be to put a label on every single property older than 50 years to say may be eligible, you know, would require evaluation for historic status if a CEQA documents required for discretionary review. That would, and then there would have to be a monitoring system to figure out, you know, does the property still exist? Is it 50 years old? Now, oh, here's another one that's 50 years old. That would be kind of one approach. Another approach is to remove that potentially eligible, which would not then flag those 1948 and earlier properties for staff as they're looking at individual review homes that come through the process. So, you know, would we still have our list handy for staff? Yes. Would it be consulted? You know, not as easily as if it appears in these parcel reports. So there's a whole host of things that has to be looked at if we're just going to remove that statement, or we can change that statement just for those 1948 and earlier. The idea, though, is leveling the playing field. I think the realtors are concerned that those people with homes earlier than 1948 are somehow singled out and lose out on, you know, to the people that don't, you know, that have homes that are older than 1948. Because
I wasn't even talking about that potentially thing. I don't like that potentially thing. I was just talking about, you know, you buy a category 2. What if, you know, it needs a lot of work. What is the city going to allow you to do that will benefit you? You have a downtown property that's R40 or whatever, you know, what does that benefit from any of our historic advantages? I think the potentially eligible is a whole nother can of worms. I'm just talking about trying to make it more obvious, you know, what the advantages are if you already have a historic home.
so again, we come to our point of, you know, how much is related to Mills Act item that we're in front of right now, and how much is, you know, another agenda item waiting to happen. So I'm worried that we're going into that territory.
Agreed. Yeah, it's at a scope.
Okay.
Yeah. I think, oh, go ahead.
So should we just wrap this item up and just talk about, Samantha's going to draft a letter to the city, to the city council? And if anyone has a chance to read through this one document that we had this is where we left off. And I think just to understand that the lighter type was in red, that was subject to further thought, conversation, comment. So maybe if we could just get to read this, Samantha's going to do a draft. Let's ourselves come up with, maybe Caroline, you can come up with your list of things items that you feel like we need to supplement this document with further documentation and information that we assume that's going to be the immediate questions from the council. So let's just perfect this like we talked about, and then give it to them.
Yeah.
They're going to have questions. It's going to be an ongoing discussion that will probably take a couple of years. So let's just get the ball rolling.
Okay. Yeah, so I would like to move to continue this discussion to the June meeting so that we can take a look at a potential letter to council and also raise any additional questions that we have about the Tailored Mills Act program that we would be proposing.
I second the motion.
Board Member Wimmer,
Aye.
Board Member Willis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Roman,
Yes.
Chair Eagleson Cheslowich.
Yes.
Motion carries 4-0.
Okay. Now let's move on to the approval of meeting minutes.
Before we get there, can I just, and when we're talking about the agenda in June, can we do a separate educational component conversation? Because I think, we need to build up our community goodwill here. And I think there are things that are already in place, and I think we need to figure out how to make that clearer to the public.
I mean, I think that's an important discussion. I wonder if that might be too large of a June meeting, given the kind of volume of I don't know what else, if we have any other properties coming up, but I know the Mills Act is it tends to be a lengthier discussion item.
We'll have our bylaws as well on that
Okay.
date. We may have a new HRB member, we may not. I'm not sure. There is time to consider, the summer agendas and what is reasonable to put on to those.
Okay.
So that might be a conversation.
Okay.
Okay. So let's look at the draft of the minutes from the March 28th meeting. Does anybody have corrections, comments? Okay.
I move to approve the meeting minutes of, what was the date again? I'm sorry. March 28th.
Okay, I will second.
Do we need
Do we need
to
to
vote?
vote individually or
I think you can do voice.
voice vote? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, now let's move on to the approval of the meeting minutes from the April 11th meeting. Does anybody have corrections or comments?
I wasn't present at that meeting, so I can't
Okay.
vote.
So then we don't have a quorum to approve it. So, okay, we will continue that to the next meeting. Okay. Are there any additional announcements by the board? Any additional staff announcements?
No, I think we do not have anything further to announce.
Okay. I will move to adjourn.
I second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you, everyone.